The following Pinole Historical Society interview has been sponsored by Crockett's Premier Auto Body, where you will discover the latest technology in auto body collision repair. At Crockett's Premier Auto Body, the motto is quality service and attention to detail. For all your auto body needs, contact Crockett's Premier Auto Body, 900 San Pablo Avenue, at 510-741-9001. Crockett's Premier Auto Body, a proud sponsor of community television for the past 13 years.
Hi, I'm Jeff Rubin, and I'm with the Pinole Historical Society, and I'm sitting here with two icons of public service, two men who have served not only as mayor and city council people in Pinole, but also on the Contra Costa County grand jury. Both of them have given much of their adult lives to public service. It's my great pleasure to introduce to my left Jack Meehan, and sitting to Jack's left, Tom Cutino. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, 50 years of public service for each of you. I'd like to sort of skip ahead and jump into one of the most important things that happened in Pinole during your years of political activity, and that is the Pinole Vista Fitzgerald Shopping Center. So, who would like to jump in and get started on the little history of that?
Well, chronologically, I guess I could take the lead on that.
Yes.
It's important to recognize that at that time, and that time was the late 60s, the city of Richmond was a very large and dominant political entity in the county before Concord really began to blossom. Richmond was bent on expanding territorially, and they had suffered a great, well, let's say an economic distress in downtown Richmond, which was beginning to show signs of the need for redevelopment. They had a redevelopment project, but it was a federal redevelopment project. But they wanted to expand. And they entertained a proposal by a developer to expand eastward from their easternmost city limits, which was near what was then Tank Farm Hill, eastward to the Pinole city limits.
So Tank Farm Hill is over where Hilltop Shopping Center is now,
It's
right?
where it is now. Yeah, it was a subsequent development. The developers proposed to annex that area, and Richmond, of course, welcomed that effort to annex vacant land up to Appian Way. The city of Pinole wasn't really, well, they weren't prepared to combat this. And in fact, the city of Pinole was really quite amateurish. It had the basic city council, a wonderful city clerk, Betty Grimes, who couldn't do everything, but she certainly did a lot.
So there was no city manager then?
There was no city manager then. But here we were about to contest, for the first time, second time really, contest an annexation by the city of Richmond.
Now, did you have official capacity at that time?
That was 67. I was probably on the Chamber of Commerce, but I had since left the city council in 65. But we saw this coming. I have to condense this now and say that there were key properties, one of which was owned by one Jovita, with a J, Jovita Fitzgerald, who was born on a ranch, the Fitzgerald Ranch, that was situated right at the intersection of Appian Way and the freeway, since long gone.
And the first school in Pinole.
And the first school in Pinole was located
was on
there.
that ranch.
Yeah. Hovita was a teacher in Berkeley, and of course these developers had to approach her and see if she would sell her her interest in 11 acres that fronted on Appian Way. She opposed that, and her neighbors living along Appian Way didn't particularly like the city of Richmond moving out there. So she opposed it. This made for a contest. The residents who lived on Appian Way caused the need for what was called an inhabited annexation. It meant there had to be a vote. There were 12 or more voters, actually about 12, most of whom have passed away, moved away, and a couple are still there. And what they did was block this annexation to the city of Richmond, and eventually a developer friendly to Pinole, joined by Hovita, caused the first development, which we know as the, the Kmart, Lucky's, or that phase.
Right.
But I think there is one family still there, and I want to be sure that she's acknowledged. Jessie Perez. Sound familiar?
Yes.
VFW post.
Yes.
Well, Emily and Jessie, I think, are still there. I hope they are. Bless them. They and their neighbors get the credit for that shopping center coming up in Pinole, which was the salvation of the economic base of the city.
Now,
so that's it in a nutshell.
Now, you had a role in this too.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Unfortunately, from time to time, we have controversy. And of course, we know that you can't satisfy everybody, but you do your best to do what's best for the city. It was,
Now, you were on the council.
I was on the council then, and it was 1980 when there was a, trying to find the word to describe, trying to figure what to do with that property. So we had city council meetings, and there were people that wanted open space. That's all they wanted, and they were very vocal about that. Then there were others that wanted to build housing. We need more housing. Trying to look ahead into the future. What are we going to do when we found, upon being elected, which is on another controversy of what known as the sign ordinance, that in 1978, Prop 13 kicked in, which meant looking to the future, we're not going to be able to sustain what we need. So it was obvious. The zoning was changed to commercial, and it went ahead that way. Now that led us on to another big subject, redevelopment, which Jack could comment on that.
The fact that the city built this giant shopping center, and it has expanded over the years, as has the population of the city. I mean, I moved here in 1984, and the city of Pinole has increased its population quite a bit since then. So now we're up to about almost 20,000 people. how do you think the shopping center and that whole development on Fitzgerald Drive has contributed to the city's growth?
That saved us. And many people did not realize it, but those that were involved, trying to look ahead. During that time, there was another controversy, redevelopment. Now, the city had already a redevelopment area
1972
that was west of what I want to call the I-80 freeway. And so now we were going to expand it in 1980 to Shea Drive and the rest of the where the Fitzgerald Shopping Center area is. Well, with the expansion of that area gave us a larger income base to do so many other things. And some of those, that base, that redevelopment base, helped us build the new city hall, helped us build the safety, fire, police safety building, helped us purchase the memorial building, helped us build the senior center, helped us build this building.
The youth center, where we're sitting right now.
I stand to be corrected, and Jack has a lot of this information. I'm just giving basics.
Redevelopment is controversial. I know in Martinez, there's a group of folks who are opposing
to this very day.
To this very day, they don't want it. Now, you campaigned for a city manager form of government back in the early 70s, and that eventually was adopted. And you also campaigned for the establishment of a redevelopment agency. So why is it important for Pinole and maybe not so important for other places, other cities?
A few words first about redevelopment. Richmond was, downtown Richmond was a redevelopment project area, but it was a federal redevelopment project area and required the influx of lots of federal money. And it didn't seem to be remedying anything down there. That was a bit of a problem when it came to their effort to annex out near Pinole. The redevelopment agency, the folks from downtown Richmond, opposed the annexation out to Pinole, the Fitzgerald annexation, because they feared it would detract from the effort down there. Federal redevelopment downtown Richmond. The other is the California State Redevelopment Program. A whole different set of rules, which were always contested. There was a key word which took us to court. Remember that? The word was blight. In order to establish an economic, a redevelopment project area, there had to be a finding of blight. So that was challenged. There were very proud people in downtown and elsewhere in Pinole who said that's an insult to call our town blighted. They took it to court, and the definition of blight was explained and reinforced to include economic blight, lack of full potential economic development.
That sort of takes the onus off of the condition of the houses and condition of neighborhoods.
Right. Yes. So that economic blight served Pinole, allowed the redevelopment project areas to expand and the agency to expand. And other agencies, as a matter of fact, relied on that interpretation and did the same thing. So economic blight, failure or lack of full economic potential. was declared to be a valid purpose
Yes.
of redevelopment.
And it's been good for Pinole.
It has worked.
Yeah.
It has worked.
So I'm going to skip now about 50 years ago. Now, you moved here in 1958, right?
Yes.
57, 58 from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And you came here 50 years ago. Now, you grew up in Monterey.
Monterey.
And your family were fishermen.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your background. I've seen some photos of you on strapping young lean man on a fishing boat. So what was that like, and how did you end up in Pinole?
Well, in 1944 we had a war going on, and I was 17 years old, and I drove my father nuts so he would sign my papers, and I joined the Navy. At that time, he had an option of signing me up for the duration of the war in 6 months, because I need you back fishing. When I came back, the sardine industry was decimated, and a lot of it had to do with a very controversial thing called DDT. So I took advantage of my GI Bill, and I went to Cal Berkeley, and a small class in engineering was 3,000 students in Quonset huts, and I couldn't make that. So I tried, and the tuition was only $98 a year. So I go over to Stanford, and it's $300. I mean, a small class would be 300 students in engineering, but the tuition was $1,000 a year. So then, as you know, young people here, they say, well, there's this old engineering school in San Francisco, and you know, you get your bachelor's degree in 3 years because there's no summer vacation, and from there, you can be admitted to Stanford, which a lot of my colleagues did. You know, it was incredible that about 25% of the students that started graduated, whether you were in Cal, Stanford, or whatever. So I got a job in Buffalo, New York.
And what was the college?
Heald's Engineering College,
Heald's
San Francisco. Yeah.
Still around?
No. It's an old 100-year-old college. And I met my wife in Buffalo. And I worked for a company that specialized in heat exchangers for refining
which is
chemical.
a good thing to have in Buffalo.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you're born in this part of the country, you live in a fabulous part of the world, and you go to Buffalo, New York. My wife is not going to like this, but anyway.
That's right. You've been married, what, 54 years?
54 years.
Yeah, so, I
You know, 6 kids, their spouses,
she's probably
and 7
okay
kids.
with whatever you're going to say by
I'm
now.
very lucky to have my wife. She's so fabulous. Anyway, I said, let me take you away from this place. And we moved, well, you waited until May to see the sunshine. It was always overcast. So I received this job with a heat exchanger company here, and we moved to El Cerrito. Well, the fog comes in from the bay, and it goes, it seems, straight to El Cerrito. And my wife said, you took me away from Buffalo because I couldn't see the sun, and you brought me to this part of the world. It's still the same. So then we scouted around and found Pinole. And Pinole is such an excellent place, especially to raise a family. You're close to the big city, you're close to the ocean, you can go to Yosemite, you can go to the snow country. This is the place for us, an excellent place to raise a family.
And warmer than El Cerrito?
And warmer than El Cerrito. So we found that a lot of people just want to hang their hat, eat, sleep, and go to work from Pinole. But there are so many great people who care about Pinole. And we are so fortunate to have those people that, especially those that have an inspiration, to have other people follow them. And when you look at all the organization of Pinole, it sends, you know, quite a message. We are so fortunate for the people that care where we live.
Yeah.
And of course, Pinole was also the center point because designing heat exchangers for refinery and chemical, to Richmond, to Rodeo, to Martinez, at the center of all the activity that I was involved with. So that's why we moved to Pinole.
Now, did you have your own business, or were you working for another company?
At that time, I was working for another company.
But you've had your own business.
Yes, and then it seemed around 1980, of course, a lot of work was through Bechtel Corporation. Refineries and power plants started to slow down, and so that company closed the office, and so I became a manufacturer's rep. And then I went into business, formed a small corporation, Thermodyne Incorporated, and we built small heat exchangers, and decided didn't want to do that either. So we had other companies, and we still do from time to time, build the equipment for us. But and Jack is going to give you some information as to how we met.
Yes.
Because he is such an inspiration as to how I got involved in politics and etc. And this is quite a story.
So before you get into that story, I want to talk a little bit about Chicago and where you grew up, and attending college at DePaul, where Ray Meyer, the great Ray Meyer, was the basketball coach, and the great George Mikan, who revolutionized the game of basketball, was a student. Tell me about your life in Chicago.
Oh. Well, I spent a quarter of a century there in Chicago. I was born at the peak of the Depression in 1930. My father was a law professor at DePaul until he died in 1936.
And he had a famous student, didn't he?
He probably had a number of famous students, one of whom was Richard J. Daley.
The original Mayor Daley.
Yeah, the number one.
Mayor Daley #1.
Yeah. Yes. Instead of a degree in law, he probably should have had a degree in mechanics, because the Chicago machine, Nevertheless, I went to night school after I graduated from high school. I went to night school for about a total of 9 years, because I was activated in the Navy Reserves in 1951. Spent 2 glorious years, all expenses paid, in Pensacola, Florida, in the backwoods of Pensacola, Florida, the Naval Air Basic Training Command. It was in the backwoods because if the cadets happened to go down unexpectedly, they wouldn't hurt anything other than themselves.
So that's the gateway to Mobile, Alabama, right?
That's right, yeah. Mobile is a great liberty town. So I spent 2 years down there and found myself, for some reason, maybe there was a fiery tongue of Pentecost or something, but I found myself to be a pretty good pistol shot. And so they made me a trainer, and got on the pistol team and spent most of my 2 years, while so many other veterans were over in Korea, where there was real shooting. I had these two years in Florida teaching cadets how to shoot pistols. I came out of the Navy. I pointed to my ear. I came out of the Navy with impaired hearing.
I can see why.
And
they make a lot of noise.
Yeah. And a lifetime master's rating in pistol shooting. Believe it or not.
So you worked for Kraft Foods. You were a food scientist.
When I was going to college, I worked full-time at Kraft Foods Company. Originally Kraft Cheese, then became Kraft Foods. And I had met James L. Kraft, the founder, and so on. And it was a wonderful job. I learned so much. This was before I even graduated. Worked in quality control and production and research, and one thing led to another. After I graduated and I was still at Kraft, they hired somebody from California who was an expert in a certain process for drying eggs. We worked together for a couple of years. His wife couldn't stand Chicago, and so they left, came back to California a few months later on a business trip through Chicago. He stopped in and offered me a job in California. That's how we came out to California in 57. It was 57.
57. You lived in Berkeley?
Spent a year and a half in Berkeley.
Is it as unusual? Was it as unusual then as it is now?
That's another story.
We'll go into that.
But then we started shopping around for permanent residence. Came out to Pinole and liked that area. Put in a deposit on a home on Deutsch and Wright Avenue. Pinole was just starting to become modern. Not long before that, they had switchboard telephones,
right.
And now suddenly the little concrete building right across the street from us right now, which was state-of-the-art for dial telephones. We could dial across the country with those dial telephones. The problem was that Pinole had grown so fast there weren't enough phone lines, so we had to contend with a number of party lines. And it was always kind of annoying to pick up the phone when you want to make a phone call and there's somebody talking on it already. You try a little later and somebody's talking on it.
Was that still Tom? The same conversation?
We eventually found out. One of us asked, "Hey, who are you and where do you live? We're on the same party line." I don't know if we had met before that or not.
I think we did. I think you were passing out a petition.
Possibly. Yes.
What a surprise.
So we discovered we were on the same telephone party line.
I think there were 4 parties still on that line. We were on a 4-party line.
Yeah. So that's how, if we didn't meet for the first time, then at least that was big. We have so much in common. If you go to the dates, you've been married 54 years. I've been married 54 years. So is my wife.
Details.
Even more, I mean, you've both been on the Chamber of Commerce. You've both been on the City Council. You've both been mayor. Now, Jack, you ran for City Council in 1960.
Oh, the first time, yeah.
And how did that go?
Well, it was an interesting first try. I didn't win. There were still a lot of the, very respectfully, I say, old-timers around, and gosh, I could rattle them off. Chester Wright, Don Arbuckle, Guy Savage, Edgar Hoke. These were people that we saw on the city council, and they were from the population 1200 era. We were approaching 3,000 and 4,000 and heading upward. And I thought it's time to get involved in that growth. So I tried it in 1960. Didn't make it. Tried it again in 62 and did make it. And so that's when I got on the council. Tom, well, he was very busy with his business and his family. Was getting interested in politics as well.
And my notes tell me that you ran in 1978.
Yes.
And
Now,
by that time, Jack had served, 3 years? and you resigned.
I did,
At some
yes.
point you resigned. Why did you resign from the council? Was that 64, 65?
Well, I resigned in 65, but in 64 I started classes over in San Francisco at Golden Gate University, night classes in public administration. I learned in the first year or two on the council that I needed to learn a lot more, and that was the place to do it. So I started in 64. It began to occupy 4 nights a week. Well, you really can't work full-time,
No way.
go to night school 4 nights a week, and be on the city council. And
Yeah. I
be
think people
meaningful.
don't realize how much time the city council business takes.
Yeah.
They see the meetings twice a month. They don't see the stacks of paper and the committee meetings and the other meetings, regional meetings that council people attend. So,
Woo, I got paid $10 a month for that.
We did better.
big money back then.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years later, only a couple of years later, it was proposed to change that to $25 a month, and the headlines in the local paper were council votes a 250% pay increase.
Well, that was a lot of money in those
That's
days.
right.
you say.
But
That's right.
in 1965, I could see that I couldn't do all of it, so I resigned from the council and continued my school and got my degree in 66.
Now, 10 years later, in 1975, there was an opening on the council, special election. Tell me about that and the interesting political experiment that occurred that year.
Remember that, Tom?
I remember.
I'm playing dumb for
Okay.
yeah. Edgar Vovsey. Ed
Oh, yes.
Vovsey.
Who, by the way, I found out a few weeks ago, has a journalism degree from the same school that I did.
Incredible.
Yeah.
We had the same instructor about 25 years apart.
We had a group of young men known as the JCs.
Uh-huh.
And that group, Jack was a member, were very instrumental in doing a lot for this city. And Valsi, I think, was president one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a
So-
well-known author now. In fact,
Yeah.
he just
He is.
came out with another book.
Yeah.
Yeah. He lives in
Las Vegas.
Las
I think
Vegas,
in
yeah.
Henderson or something
Yeah.
like that.
Well, Ed Vovsey resigned from the council, and there was a vacancy. And the council decided, instead of making an appointment, and I don't remember who else was on the council at that time, but they decided to have a special election. There were, I think, only 2 who filed. One was Jim Blyler, and one was myself. Now, I had known Jim for a number of years, and it was a friendly kind of campaign. We decided we weren't going to spend a lot of money. We were going to get this over with in a very friendly way. We agreed to print a 1 8.5 by 11 flyer each. Say whatever you want on that flyer. We would each have one. We got together at my house. Our wives helped fold one flyer from each one, put them in the same envelope. And on the envelope it said, enclosed is an interesting experiment in efficient politics, something like that.
Probably never, not since repeated.
I doubt that. It was certainly a breakthrough then. Jim Blyler won. I don't remember what the count was, but he served well for the rest of that term. So that was my third crack at it, but it was merely to occupy a seat until the end of that term. I had plenty of other things to do.
So a couple of years later, in 1978, you ran for the city council. Why?
Again, a very controversial thing going on, known as the sign ordinance. But let me take you a little further back to as when I arrived here. And not too long thereafter, after I met Jack, he said, why don't you come down to the city council and see what goes on in our town? And I thought, why not? Well, first thing was, I was on the USS Miami, a light cruiser, and you meet people from all parts of the country, and especially those from the South. I always took a lot of interest in that because I associated that with, I won't go into it, but anyway, so we had these people on this council talking with a Southern accent, and I enjoyed that. Well, I kept going to the council meetings, and councils changed. There's some councils where there was the booing, the clapping, the whistling, the stamping of the feet, paper airplanes as, why go to the theater? This is better than the movies. It's a free show. Come to the council.
Twice a month.
Right. So.
And we're not on TV.
Yes. And so, as I talk about people who inspire others, both of you do very well. Jack inspired me. Why don't you join the Chamber of Commerce? Because I had my business. And at that time, I was elected the president in 1969. We had no city manager. And the chamber did so much of trying to promote business in town that it was Jack who helped the city council put a ballot for a city manager. Now, at that time also, there was a city manager in San Pablo who brought in Simon Hardware and so forth and so on. And we're all part-timers. Nobody's getting paid. We thought we needed somebody professional. And so that's how we were able to get a city manager to help us as such. So continuing with the chamber activities, etc., this controversy started, but I have to back up a little bit. We have so many wonderful people in this town. Mr. Al Toretta, who owned what we call the food center, the best meat in town, the groceries, put up a sign.
My wife used to call that the home of the lazy beef.
Well,
because they had that.
That's what we're talking about. The sign, you see,
that big sign up there.
So you had the sign of the lazy beef. Well, at that time, I don't know if it was because we didn't have that. We did have the design review board that reported to the planning commission. This did not pass, and they wanted him to take that down. Now, Mr. Toretta, a very generous person. We had the little league, the baseball. He would give them all the soft drinks, the hot dogs. He did a lot of charity work as such. And we just thought that wasn't fair for a guy, So what if that sign, it's better than just a plain wall.
Yeah.
So we had the controversy over the sign ordinance. And that's when I got involved and ran for council and was elected. And it wasn't too long thereafter that our council, we changed the items of the sign law to be reasonable. And I was asked, I said, to my supporters, look, you know what? Mission accomplished. I'm out of here. You can't. We've spent a lot of time and effort. You've got to stay. Well, I had other things to do. But Jack will tell you, city politics, you can't satisfy everybody.
Yeah.
You're going to have enemies. And unfortunately, some of them, there's even hatred. I mean, regardless, you do what's best for the city. That's what you were elected to do.
And so you served 6 years.
No, I served the 4, and after that,
Just the 4?
Well, the term is a 4-year term.
Oh, okay.
Every 2 years we have an election because we change from a council of 5 to 3 years in one election, 2 years, and we alternate that way. Okay. So I had enough at 4. Yeah. But
not enough for public service. In fact, either of you, because you were both on on the Contra Costa County grand jury at some point. Not together.
No,
Right?
I was.
Who served first?
I did.
You served first.
At that time, the grand jury consisted of both criminal and civil, and then later it was changed. At that time, you had a municipal court, and you had the superior court, and the district attorney had the option of going to try you in municipal court or going to the grand jury to get an indictment. Well, anyway, there were so many other things that all of a sudden you're in for the sign ordinance, and so many things come up like, what are we going to do with this city in 10 years with Prop 13 hit? And so we had all these other items.
How long did you serve on the grand jury?
It's normally 1 year,
Uh-huh.
but they changed from a calendar year to a fiscal year, and I was asked to serve another 6 years, so I served 18 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
And after, when did you join the grand jury, Jack? Remember when?
I believe it was 97, 98.
And so that was one term?
One term, 1 year, starting July 1, ending June 30 of the next year.
So what's interesting about being on a grand jury?
Shall we tell them what's interesting?
Do you really want to know?
Go ahead.
I'll let Jack
Go
do that.
for it.
I'll chip in a little.
I'll let Jack do that.
A little tidbit. I was invited to address a group of the native daughters of the Golden West. What's the title?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yep. Okay. And I was telling them about grand jury service. There had been, prior to 97, there had been a situation where a county supervisor, no need to rehash all of that, had used her office for campaigning, had her staff making campaign calls and things like that. And
Gee, that stuff never happens anymore, does it?
yeah, well, this was in the newspapers and so on. Well, remember, the Board of Supervisors appropriates money to the courts, to the district attorney. The grand jury is an arm of the court, Superior Court of the state of California. Well, here was a very difficult situation, and so they dumped it on the grand jury. And they had the grand jury examine it. I was not on, and this is all published. They handed down 10 indictments. 5 had to do with conduct in office, and 5 had to do with testimony to the grand jury. Went to trial, and over a period of a few years, the counts about malfeasance in office were dismissed, and 4 out of the 5 accounts of perjury to the grand jury, 4 out of 5 were dismissed. So there was only 1 count. And I asked this group that I was addressing, I said, do you want to hear the details of the hearings? And they all said, yeah, we want to hear the details. Yeah, tell us. I said, I can't tell you a thing.
That's right. It's all
Because
secret.
you sworn to secrecy.
It's all secret.
That's right.
So it's really the key point is that with all of the indictments, all of the studies, grand juries speak only through their written reports. And grand jurors, like us, can speak nothing of who we talked to, who we investigated, when, anything like that. If you want to know what we did, you have to be able to read it. So this county supervisor...
And this county supervisor's name was? Do you remember? It was
Yes.
a woman.
It's a woman,
woman.
yeah.
And I've blanked on her
was-
name, but I remember when this happened.
She was sentenced. I don't remember whether it was time in the pokey or whether it was suspended.
She went to jail. I think she went to
actually
jail.
go to jail and then so on one count. Perjury to the grand jury,
Yeah.
which is significant
Yeah.
because even though the DA washed his hands of this whole thing, gosh, we don't want to make the Board of Supervisors or any member, former or future, angry with us. So we'll let the grand jury do it. And the courts really were a little nervous about the conviction and the penalty. But here was a case where even a county supervisor going before the grand jury perjured herself. I don't remember. I don't know the question or anything like that. But that was the one thing that sent her to jail. So our grand jury
Was a little different from what we had at that time because we had the criminal
You had
aspect.
criminal.
We had the
yeah.
criminal. Now, trying to make this short, the district attorney at that era, for instance, we had a rape case. Well, the victim would normally not want to get involved in testifying, well, without their testimony. So at that time, the district attorney could either go through the municipal court and find that if there was enough evidence that this attacker should stand trial in Superior Court. So in municipal court, she's going to be asked all these questions in public and so forth and so on, and she probably didn't want to do, her attorney would not want to do that. So the district attorney had the option of presenting this to the grand jury. So the grand jury would be called, and the victim would use one of the court facilities that was vacant and explain this to the grand jury. And at that time we were 19 grand jurors with 5 alternates. And if we felt from the evidence presented that this person, there was sufficient evidence for this attacker to stand trial, we would call in the grand jury judge, and we would present an indictment. An indictment says you're not guilty. It says there's enough evidence for you to stand trial in Superior Court. So that's how that was handled at that time. Since they've eliminated the municipal courts, things have changed, and at that time also, we had 10 judges, 10 courts, and each judge of each court could pick 3 candidates, and they'd take their names and put them in a box, and you'd get pulled. And
3 candidates for
the 25 positions,
25 positions on the grand jury,
and 5 alternates. Then when things changed and everything, then people could, I believe, volunteer for that. So it's a long story, I won't go to it. But anyway, it was a very serious, listening to so many gory details of some of the most heinous things that happened in this county that I don't even think about it for what we went through.
So
that's why when you're sworn in the grand jury, you will speak nothing of what you hear.
Oh, yeah. But another item with that was that I was chairman of the finance and whatnot department, because the grand jury is supposed to check on various organizations.
And all the grand jurors have committee assignments,
and then
there's a chairperson for each of the committees?
So at that time, any citizen could write a letter to the grand jury And at their regular meetings, this letter would be read, passed around. Does any juror want to continue investigating this? And maybe 2 or 3 say, yes, I want to. Well, then the grand total would vote to give you the authority to investigate. Now you get a gold card. So when you go into, whether it be a supervisor's office or a police chief's office or whatnot, and you give that person a bad time, you are in contempt of superior court because you are an officer of the court. And I never put anybody in contempt,
No.
but it was a different power. And then you wrote your report, as far as that. But I'd like to get us back on history.
So,
Interesting.
your service on the grand jury ended in 1998.
In 98, I should point out
Right.
that I was nominated by Judge Fannin,
Oh,
local resident, friend of ours.
lived on a Linda court.
In 1977, I was nominated, but I had to get permission from my employer, which was the federal government at the time, and they denied permission. Again, in 78, they denied permission. But then Coley, Judge Fannin, asked my wife if she would be willing to be a nominee, and why not? So she served on the grand jury, first as an alternate, and then midterm took a permanent seat. So Teresa was also a member of the grand jury, and I think it was 1978.
Well, and so you served 20 years later.
I served 1 year. She
Yeah.
served a term.
Yeah. So your term ended in 98, and
Yes.
in March of 1999, something else interesting occurred in your life.
Oh,
Would you
March,
like to, March 21st,
March
1999?
21st, yeah.
What happened that day?
Well, that I died on that day.
You look pretty good for a deceased person.
Well, no, there was another. No, you're thinking of the other story. No, I actually, according to the medical records, I died while I was driving on the freeway, Interstate 80 in Vallejo, heading home after going to a model train show.
What else would it be?
Well, what else would it be? But I had 2 grandsons in the back seat, grandson Johnny and grandson Ben. They were cousins. Teresa was sitting on the driver's side, and I was driving home in the fast lane. And that's when everything stopped. Everything I know or relate after that is what I read or was told to me. She was able to get the car over to the side and stop just before the bridge, the old bridge. And that in itself was an act of God. And several cars stopped, having seen her weave a little bit and then gradually stopped. Several cars stopped, and out pops an MD, at that time in practice in Pinole, a respiratory therapist, at that time practicing at Brookside Hospital, an off-duty EMT. I mean, I couldn't script
What a
it.
miracle. What
Yes.
a miracle.
I couldn't script anything better than that.
Now that's a miracle.
So they as I understand, they pulled me out of the car and laid me down. The fire department from Vallejo responded, and I remember the 3 firefighters. There was Jackson, Ray Jackson, Ivano Paoli, and another firefighter named Bowden. Well, the first thing they did was unzip my wonderful sweatshirt and T-shirt, and proceeded to get some experience with their defibrillator. They figured, well, here's a chance
And those were new then, right? Not every fire department had defibrillators.
Not every.
back then.
This they'd only had it a relatively short time. And according to the medical records, first shot was for practice. The second shot didn't help. Now, the medical record is different from the fire department's record. The medical record showed there were 3 attempts, and on the third attempt, they got me and restarted my engine, and off I went. Not to Kaiser and Vallejo, but because Sunday afternoon. They weren't able to do anything. They sent me to Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa, which did a great job. And it's a quad bypass, and came out of there feeling, aches and pains, as you might expect. And the prognosis was she bypass will last you about 8 years.
And so here we are. It's 11 years later.
Yeah, it's 11 years. But actually, what they told me, they said, we'll give you an unconditional lifetime guarantee. And so I've got an unconditional lifetime guarantee. Work on that.
And so one of the ways you two spend your lives is every other Tuesday at 7 o'clock at Pinole City Hall on, I like to call it Section A, last row, seat 1 and seat 2. We'll find Jack Meehan and Tom Cutino getting ready for what's usually a lengthy city council meeting. And
I consider the meetings today.
You're still coming. Why are you still coming?
Well, there's so much, there's so much to do, and very interesting. Sometimes I think it's kind of boring. I go back to the stomping of the feet and booing and clapping the hands and whistling. But it's different from what it was 30 years ago. We have so many more difficult things for the city council to consider, and we're very fortunate to have the council we have. Mayor Debbie Long, fantastic. All of them volunteered to get involved because, as I recall, and Jack can help me, I think it was 6 years ago, nobody ran for council. And the thought was, well, everybody's satisfied with what they're doing, or nobody cares. And the people that came out, Roy Swearigan and Debbie and, excuse me, I forget her name. Virginia, cared. And I think we're very fortunate to help them.
And obviously you care.
Well, we care because our kids, they may be all gone, but they come and go like we're still here.
Yeah.
And what happens there affects us directly. I think we're so fortunate for what we have.
Jack, you want to add to
Tom,
that before we wrap it up?
Tom hit it right on hit the nail right on the head. Politics is ongoing. We don't live in the past. We remember the past, but we don't live in the past. We can look back and grin and think, yes, I remember this or I remember that, and this is how we did it, and that's what we can remember that. But the government of our city continues, and it continues only as long as there are participants. Because remember the phrase, we the people, and so on. And when we the people don't care, that's when we're doomed. So we show up, and we're not there to say, that's not how we did it 20 years ago. We say, with the benefit of hindsight and experience, this is how we suggest you approach this problem. Not with the solutions, but this is how you see. Because next week, you going to be there next week?
God willing.
God willing. Am I going to be there next week? I don't know how the warranty's going. But they're going to have to continue without us. What we've done, we hope, was good for us, all the people in the past. We hope that it gives some guidance to those in the future. And that's why we are interested, and will probably continue to be interested in caring, not just interested in watching TV, but caring enough to go down and take part.
Jack, thank you. Tom, thank you. It's been a
pleasure.
It's been a pleasure spending
so
this
much.
time with you. Thank you. This is Jeff Rubin from the Pinole Historical Society, and I would like to thank Crockett's Premier Auto Body for their sponsorship of this program. We hope you enjoyed it, and please join us again soon for another program in our series interviewing people important in the history of our city. Thank you very much for watching.
The following Pinole Historical Society interview has been sponsored by Crockett's Premier Auto Body, where you will discover the latest technology in auto body collision repair. At Crockett's Premier Auto Body, the motto is quality service and attention to detail. For all your auto body needs, contact Crockett's Premier Auto Body, 900 San Pablo Avenue, at 510-741-9001. Crockett's Premier Auto Body, a proud sponsor of community television for the past 13 years.